Poems of Love and Hate is an anthology that spans 400 years. Many of the poems have been personal favorites from boyhood. I selected them because I love them, and I love them for the beauty of their words, for the secrets they hold, for the pleasure of discovering those secrets through interpretation, through reading them aloud, which is what most poets want of their work, I'm sure. When I finally settled on this group of poems, I had, and still have, no intention of using them as a vehicle to preach a point of view. Two things did emerge, though, and I think they should be mentioned. The poems of love make us realize that love does not always generate love, that love cannot be pushed or molded or twisted to suit one's fancy. Love has a natural pace, a natural pulse, and we must learn to match that pace, to feel that pulse. The poems of hate are best summed up by Byron, who reminded us that hatred is by far the longest pleasure. Men love in haste, but they detest at leisure. I'm afraid Byron was right. Nevertheless, the poems of hate counsel me to express my resentment, to release the poisoned energy that hate is, if only to preserve my own peace of mind. And finally, in my search through scores and scores of books, I found that poems of love far outnumber poems of hate. It augurs well for the next 400 years. My love is like to ice, and I to fire. How comes it then that this, her cold so great, is not dissolved through my so hot desire, but harder grows the more I her entreat? Or how comes it that my exceeding heat is not allayed by her heart-frozen cold, but that I burn much more in boiling sweat, and feel my flames augmented manifold? What more miraculous thing may be told, that fire, which all things melts, should harden ice, and ice, which is congealed with senseless cold, should kindle fire by wonderful device? Such is the power of love in gentle mind, that it can alter all the course of kind. When Daisies Pied. This chirpy little poem is a poem about love and the problems that love brings, rather than a love poem. We don't use the word cuckold very much these days in describing men whose wives are fancy-free, who flirt and even have love affairs with other men. The poem plays on the association of the word cuckold, describing the husband of an unfaithful wife, and the song of the cuckoo, which was a common sound in the English countryside of Shakespeare's day. Every time such a fearful husband heard this sound, he was reminded of the problem of his wife's infidelity and the public and private shame he felt in that he was not attractive enough to hold and satisfy his wife. The concept of the man who fears or knows that his wife is a philanderer is pitiful enough. But the cuckold in the poem seems even more pathetic, as Shakespeare describes the peace and beauty of the countryside, which should mean all is well with the world, but which contrasts starkly and sadly with the depression of the husband. His depression, as it were, is emphasized, heightened by the very beauty of the surroundings. When daisies pied and violets blue, and lady smocks all silver white, and cuckoo buds of yellow hue do paint the meadows with delight, the cuckoo then on every tree mocks married men. For thus sings he, cuckoo, 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 O word of fear, unpleasing to a married ear. When shepherds pipe on oaten straws, and merry larks are ploughmen's clocks, when turtles tread, and rooks and daws, and maidens bleach their summer smocks, the cuckoo then on every tree mocks married men. For thus sings he, cuckoo, 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 O word of fear, unpleasing to a married ear. No anthology of poems of love in this style would be complete without Elizabeth Barrett Browning's famous expression of devotion and feeling for her husband Robert. How do I love thee? From the Sonnets from the Portuguese. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach, when feeling out of sight for the ends of being and ideal grace. I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need, by sun and candlelight. I love thee freely, as men strive for right. I love thee purely, as they turn from praise. I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs, and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with a love I seem to lose with my lost saints. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life. And if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death. Edgar Allan Poe is best known for his macabre tales of mystery and imagination. This poem, especially in its last stanza, has the same macabre flavor about it. As I comment on this poem, I cannot help linking it with Porphyria's Lover, because there is the common ground of necrophilia, that is, physical love of the dead person. Despite the strangeness of the poem and its telling, there is nevertheless a theme of devotion and love which comes across clearly, innocent at first, yet in the end perhaps perverted. There is a quality about this poem that has appealed to me since I first read it. It conjures up images of towers and mists and pounding waves and sad processions of knights, such as is found in another poem in this anthology, La Belle Dame sans Merci by Keats. Both these poems have a flavor that carries us into a dream world, a fairy world in the case of Keats, a fantasy world in the case of Poe. It was many and many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived, whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. I was a child, and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea, but we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Annabel Lee, with a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And this was the reason that long ago in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabel Lee, so that her high-born kinsman came and bore her away from me to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of the cloud one night, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we. And neither the angels in heaven above, nor the demons down under the sea, can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee, and the stars never rise but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And so, all the night tide, I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in the sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. I was shocked when I first read this next poem. I recognized it immediately as a poem of hate. Christina did have a sister whose name was Maria, but since her life was very sheltered and centered on her brothers and sister, it seems unlikely that the poem is an attack upon Maria. We know that she did have 2 unhappy love affairs, and perhaps Sister Maud was created as a byproduct of one of them. The voice of the poem, however, must speak to us from its own context. The poetess is reflecting in the presence of the body of her dead lover. The thoughts that oppress her center on her sister Maud. It would seem that if Maud had been a discreet, protecting and loving sister, the love affair would have been a happy and beautiful one. But Maud was jealous of her sister's lover, coveted him for herself, and caused untold and unnecessary grief to their parents by telling them. The poetess obviously feels that perhaps what could have been the most beautiful experience of her life has become one of the utmost pain and suffering. No wonder she hates Sister Maud, and don't we all? Who told my mother of my shame? Who told my father of my dear? Oh, who but Maud, my sister Maud, who lurked to spy and peer? Cold he lies, as cold as stone, with his clotted curls about his face, the comeliest corpse in all the world, and worthy of a queen's embrace. You might have spared his soul, sister. have spared my soul, your own soul too. Though I had not been born at all, he'd never have looked at you. My father may sleep in paradise, my mother at heaven gate, but Sister Maud shall get no sleep, either early or late. My father may wear a golden gown, my mother a crown may win. If my dear and I knocked at heaven gate, perhaps they'd let us in. But Sister Maud, oh, Sister Maud, bide you with death and sin. Now, Twilight, a poem by John Masefield. It's about the love he bears for the dear friends of his childhood. The poet is walking along a high road with a friend. It is twilight. Below them in the valley, people are starting to light the house lamps. A mist is gathering, and the first star is seen. The day's work is done, and all the laborers have returned. This is the setting which puts the poet in the mood to recall the loving friends of his childhood who are now dead. Twilight it is, and the far woods are dim, and the rooks cry and call. Down in the valley, the lamps and the mist, and a star over all. There by the rick where they thresh is the drone at an end. Twilight it is, and I travel the road with my friend. I think of the friends who are dead, who were dear long ago in the past. Beautiful friends who are dead, though I know that death cannot last. Friends with the beautiful eyes that the dust has defiled. Beautiful souls who were gentle when I was a child. I think I was 14 or 15 when I first read Down by the Sally Gardens. And since then I've realized how charged it is with wisdom. The impatience and the immediacy of the demands of youth are painfully familiar themes. One laments that most of us, perhaps all of us, can only learn how to live life at a natural pace through bad experience. The Sally Gardens are famous public gardens in Dublin. It was here the poet met his love, and it was here that he made the mistake of forcing the pace of his love for her. He had not yet learned one of the great secrets of living and loving. Play it cool. Take it easy, man. Softly, softly. One wonders if any young person, or any old one for that matter, has learned wisdom from this poem. What does come across is the lack of sensitivity to the messages she tried to give him, as well as the real regret, the pathos of a beautiful but lost love, an enchanting opportunity lost forever. Down by the Sally Gardens my love and I did meet. She passed the Sally Gardens with little snow-white feet. She bid me take love easy as the leaves grow on the tree. But I, being young and foolish, with her would not agree. In a field by the river my love and I did stand, and on my leaning shoulder she laid her snow-white hand. She bid me take life easy, as the grass grows on the weirs. But I was young and foolish, and now am full of tears.
Sally Gardens, my love and guided me. She passed by the Sally Gardens on her little snow-white feet. She bid me take love easy as the leaves grow upon the tree. But I was young and foolish, and with her did not agree.
Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon are two of the best-known English poets of the First World War. Their poems tell of the agony, the uselessness, the horror, and the waste of war, and by extension, their hatred of war and the war makers. This poem is different in that it is a poem of hate, not about hate in human relationships, but a broader hate against society's aberrations. The worst of these aberrations is, of course, war. Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, for those of you not familiar with Latin, means it is a sweet and noble thing to die for one's country. From this saying the poem gets its title. It describes with horrible vividness the terrible suffering of a group of men, exhausted and wounded, retreating from the war zone. The horror of such a journey is compounded by the terror of encountering a wave of chlorine gas, from which at least one man does not escape. From this moving, horrifying picture, the poet, in a kind of restrained but white-hot anger, declares to those who would glorify war that they are ignorant or liars or both. Bent double, like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshod. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of tired, outstripped 5-9s that dropped behind. Gas! Gas! Quick, boys! An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone still was yelling out and stumbling, and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If, in some smothering dreams, you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face, like a devil sick of sin. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory, the old lie, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. Now a poem by Siegfried Sassoon. It's another anti-war poem, a companion of sorts to the preceding one. Sassoon takes careful aim at the makers of red tape, the ones for whom war is a kind of sport, who bask in its questionable glory and cunningly avoid its bloody horror. If I were fierce and bald and short of breath, I'd live with scarlet majors at the base and speed glum heroes up the line to death. You'd see me with my puffy, petulant face, guzzling and gulping in the best hotel, reading the roll of honor. Poor young chap, I'd say. I used to know his father well. Yes, we've lost heavily in this last scrap. And when the war is done and youth stone dead, I'd toddle safely home and die in bed. This next poem is a difficult one to understand at first listening, but once understood, it's easy to see why it has become one of the classic love poems of English literature, especially when one considers the discipline involved in arranging the concepts into 14 lines of iambic pentameter, which we call a sonnet. It is in fact the 18th sonnet of Shakespeare. The lover wants to reflect on the beauty of his love, and looks for comparisons in the world of nature. To what shall he compare the loved one? Thus we have the opening line, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" And the answer, surprisingly, is no. And why? Because his love is much lovelier than a summer's day. In the second line, he tells us that his love is more lovely and more temperate, in other words, more beautiful, more consistent, more even-tempered. The poet then reflects on the deficiencies which can spoil a summer's day. The very season itself is marred by the rough winds of the opening weeks. The days themselves are not always pleasant, sometimes too hot, sometimes not hot enough. In fact, everything in nature which is beautiful declines in beauty sooner or later. And here the poet injects a spiritual element. He asserts, as it were, that his loved one's personality, with its matching beauty, will be eternally the same. The loved one will die, but such is her beauty that the light of her personality will overcome the darkness symbolic of death. In the last two lines, the poet further asserts that his poem will sustain the memory of his beloved. In other words, every time this sonnet is read, the memory of the poet's loved one will be revived. This surely is one of the sweetest love poems in our language. Shakespeare wrote it for his own time and for ours. His message is timeless. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. La belle dame sans merci is a French phrase which means, roughly, the beautiful lady without compassion. Earlier in this anthology, you heard the poem Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe. There are comparisons and contrasts in these two poems. In La Belle Dame, the poet speaks for the first 12 lines, and then the knight replies. The poet is walking in the countryside when he meets a knight in armour wandering on the side of a hill and looking very forlorn and depressed. He asks the obvious question, "What ails thee?" The knight then gives us an account of his meeting with a beautiful and enchanting lady, a fantasy figure from the world of fairies and elves. The knight is so taken by her that he falls desperately, hopelessly, and completely in love. He then recounts how she returned his love, and in a timeless scene, how they expressed their love to each other. They travel all day to her fairy home. It's hard to describe the home of the beautiful fairy lady, because the experience of the knight is in a world somewhere between reality and dreaming. It is here their love is expressed most intimately, and the whole episode reaches a climax. The knight falls asleep and has a dream, more correctly a nightmarish vision of the other men who have been similarly captivated by this enchantress, and have been so deeply affected by the experience that their lives can never be the same again. The knight in our poem is obviously condemned to join their number. He has, in short, met a witch who has cast her spell over him. He meets the poet after he has been transported to the cold hill's side, where he awakes. Oh, what can ail thee, knight-at-arms, alone and palely loitering? The sedge is withered from the lake, and no birds sing. Oh, what can ail thee, knight-at-arms, so haggard and so woe-begone? The squirrel's granary is full, and the harvest's done. I see a lily on thy brow, with anguish moist and fever dew, and on thy cheek a fading rose fast withereth too. I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a fairy's child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. I made a garland for her head, and bracelets too, and fragrant zone. She looked at me as she did love, and made sweet moan. I set her on my pacing steed, and nothing else saw all day long, for sideways would she lean and sing a fairy's song. She found me roots of relish sweet, and honey wild and manna dew, and sure in language strange she said, I love thee true. She took me to her elfin grot, and there she wept and sighed full sore, and there I shut her wild, wild eyes with kisses for. And there she lulled me asleep, and there I dreamed, ah, woe betide, the latest dream I ever dreamed on the cold hill's side. I saw pale kings and princes too, pale warriors, death pale were they all, who cried, La belle dame sans merci hath thee in thrall. I saw their starved lips in the gloam, with horrid warning gaped wide, and I awoke and found me here on the cold hill's side. And this is why I sojourn here, alone and palely loitering, though the sedge is withered from the lake, and no birds sing. This poem, Lines to a Don, seems just perfect for inclusion in an anthology of poems of hate. It certainly is that. But it also reflects the love and respect that Hilaire Belloc held for G.K. Chesterton. And although it cuts deeply, it makes us laugh. Belloc dipped his pen in burgundy, not acid. The poem is set in Oxford, wherein Belloc, the academic, is attacking a third academic whose opinions regarding Chesterton he obviously wishes to condemn. The opinions as such are not attacked, but the writer is ridiculed as a lesser man, not only in comparison with Chesterton, but also in comparison with the academic tradition of scholarship for which Oxford University is famous. In the poem, Belloc first of all attacks the unnamed Don as a person unworthy to take part in any kind of debate. He then praises the other academics, the other Dons at Oxford, who are rightly esteemed. In the midst of a forceful barrage of words, he calls a halt to himself with a veiled threat to the Don. If you write any more rubbish about Chesterton, says Belloc, beware, my pen is poised. Lines to a Don. Remote and ineffectual Don that dared attack my Chesterton with that poor weapon, half impelled, unlearnt, unsteady, hardly held, unworthy for a tilt with men, your quavering and corroded pen. Don poor at bed and worse at table, Don pinched, Don starved, Don miserable, Don stuttering, Don with roving eyes, Don nervous, Don of crudities, Don clerical, Don ordinary, Don self-absorbed and solitary, Don here and there, Don epileptic, Don puffed and empty, Don dyspeptic, Don middle class, Don sycophantic, Don dull, Don brutish, Don pedantic, Don hypocritical, Don bad, Don furtive, Don three-quarters mad, Don since a man must make an end, dawn that shall never be my friend. Dawn different from those regal dawns, with hearts of gold and lungs of bronze, who shout and bang and roar and bawl the absolute across the hall, or sail in amply billowing gown enormous through the sacred town, bearing from college to their homes deep cargoes of gigantic tomes. Dawns admirable, dawns of might, uprising on my inward sight, compact of ancient tales and port and sleep and learning of a sort. Dawns English, worthy of the land, dawns rooted, dawns that understand, good dawns perpetual that remain a landmark walling in the plain, the horizon of my memories, like large and comfortable trees. Dawn very much apart from these, thou scapegoat dawn, thou dawn devoted, dawn to thine own damnation quoted, perplexed to find thy trivial name reared in my verse to lasting shame. Dawn dreadful, rasping dawn and wearing, repulsive dawn, dawn past all bearing, dawn of the cold and doubtful breath, dawn despicable, dawn of death, dawn nasty, skimpy, silent, level, dawn evil, dawn that serves the devil, dawn ugly. That makes 50 lines. There is a canon which confines a rhymed octosyllabic curse, if written in iambic verse, to 50 lines. I never cut. I far prefer to end it, but, believe me, I shall soon return. My fires are banked, but still they burn, to write some more about the dawn that dared attack my Chesterton. The Song of Wandering Angus is another of those fairy poems by W.B. Yeats. It simply tells the story of one strange episode in the life of a mortal man, an episode that set him on the search for something he could never find. I think it is not so much one man's search for love as for the unattainable. W.B. Yeats is a poet who captures the storytelling spirit common on the west coast of Ireland. Here there is a firm belief in the existence of the little people, the leprechauns, the equivalent of the gnomes of northern Europe. On rare occasions they make themselves visible to human beings. This is the kind of belief, the kind of atmosphere in which Yeats could write the Song of Wandering Angus. The poet, feeling an inner need, walks into the woods at dusk. He cuts a stick from a hazel bush, attaches a line to it, and using a berry as bait, begins to fish. Almost immediately he catches a trout. Back in his cottage, he kindles the fire. In that instant, the fish becomes a beautiful girl with apple blossom in her hair, who calls him by his name and disappears into the night. His life, even to his old age, becomes obsessed with the desire to find the beautiful maiden and be with her forever. I went out to the hazel wood because a fire was in my head, and cut and peeled a hazel wand and hooked a berry to a thread. And when white moths were on the wing, and moth-like stars were flickering out, I dropped the berry in a stream, and caught a little silver trout. When I had laid it on the floor, I went to blow the fire aflame, but something rustled on the floor, and someone called me by my name. It had become a glimmering girl with apple blossom in her hair, who called me by my name and ran and faded through the brightening air. Though I am old with wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands, I will find out where she has gone, and kiss her lips, and take her hands, and walk among long dappled grass, and pluck till time and times are done, the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun. What is William Blake saying in A Poisoned Tree? The first 4 lines are plain and simple. If you talk about your anger, your resentment, you let the hate-filled energy flow into nothingness. But if you do not talk about your resentment, if you keep it bottled up inside yourself, it festers, and both the hater and the hated will suffer. Blake describes that which we all know. A resentment unexpressed grows by imagination and fear. It also grows by the deceit and the hypocrisy of pretending nothing is wrong. The hate so grows within the mind of the hater in the poem that in the end he must perform some act of revenge and vindictiveness which will destroy his foe. We do not know what this destructive act of deceit, this trap, is. It is spoken of in the poem in symbolic language as an apple. The foe, the hated person, is so tempted by some act or some possession of the poet that he cannot resist stealing it. Symbolically, this is the eating of the poisoned apple from the tree. He, in fact, does fall for the trap, and in so doing brings about his own destruction. It seems that the hater has won a victory, but there is no one who listens to this poem who does not conclude that the hater has suffered too. He has destroyed so much good in himself that he is no longer the same person. A Poisoned Tree. I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe. I told it not, my wrath did grow. And I watered it in fears, night and morning with my tears, and I sunned it with smiles and with soft deceitful wiles. And it grew both day and night, till it bore an apple bright, and my foe beheld it shine, and he knew that it was mine, and into my garden stole when the night had veiled the pole. In the morning, glad I see my foe outstretched beneath the tree. A touch of necrophilia, a dash of supreme arrogance, and a big slice of distorted compassion. They're all here in this tale of horror. Porphyria's lover certainly has a beautiful opening scene. The lover is in a cold cottage in the woods on a stormy night. The cold, the bleak weather, and the lonely man make for a dreary picture. But suddenly Porphyria arrives. The place lights up and warms with her presence. Added vividness and symbolism is contained in the actions of lighting the fire and taking off her damp outer garments. There could be few gestures more touching than the simple movements of Porphyria towards her lover, and we have to conclude that he must have been attractive to draw her love. But he wanted her completely with that jealous possessiveness which often spoils what could be true love. He reflects on how Porphyria experiences an inner conflict between her love for him and the other relationships, entertainments, and pursuits in her life. On this particular night, Porphyria had left her friends and a party held in her honor to visit her lonely lover. The lover knew that at least at this moment there was no conflict, that Porphyria was completely and utterly his. To preserve forever this moment and this possession, the lover, in the most horrible, twisted, and warped action imaginable, murders Porphyria. The last lines prove the lover's insanity. The last line seems odd. Perhaps Browning is having a tilt at that kind of religious belief which overemphasizes retributive suffering, such as would expect a bolt of lightning and perhaps a dash of limestone. Porphyria's lover. The rain set early into night. The sullen wind was soon awake. It tore the elm tops down for spite, and did its worst to vex the lake. I listened with heart fit to break, when glided in Porphyria. Straight she shut the cold out and the storm, and kneeled and made the cheerless grate blaze up and all the cottage warm. Which done, she rose, and from her form withdrew the dripping cloak and shawl, and laid her soiled gloves by, untied her hat, and let the damp hair fall. And last, she sat down by my side and called me. When no voice replied, she put my arm about her waist, and made her smooth white shoulder bare, and all her yellow hair displaced, and stooping, made my cheek lie there, and spread o'er all her yellow hair, murmuring how she loved me, she too weak for all her heart's endeavor to set its struggling passion free from pride, and vainer ties dissever, and give herself to me forever. But passion sometimes would prevail, nor could tonight's gay feast restrain a sudden thought of one so pale for love of her, and all in vain. So she was come through wind and rain. Be sure I looked up at her eyes, happy and proud. At last I knew Porphyria worshipped me. Surprise made my heart swell, and still it grew while I debated what to do. That moment she was mine, fair, perfectly pure and good. I found a thing to do, and all her hair, in one long yellow string, I wound 3 times her little throat around, and strangled her. No pain felt she. I am quite sure she felt no pain. As a shut bud that holds a bee, I warily oped her lids. Again laughed the blue eyes without a stain. And I untightened next the tress about her neck. Her cheek once more blushed bright beneath my burning kiss. I propped her head up as before, only this time my shoulder bore her head, which droops upon it still, the smiling, rosy little head, so glad it has its utmost will, that all it scorned at once is fled, and I, its love, am gained instead. Porphyria's love. She guessed not how her darling one wish would be heard. And thus we sit together now, and all night long we have not stirred, and yet God has not said a word.